What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks, not at Starbucks Shanghai, but at Nerd Tees. And welcome to week 15 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL regular season and postseason. We're getting down to the wire here, folks. We got precious few weeks left to really make our statement, not only on this CFL season, but build as much momentum as possible heading into the playoffs. And that's as true for me as it is for any of the teams that are in the CFL that are in that playoff hunt. Had a pretty good week in week 14, doubled up, 6 correct, 3 incorrect across all the CFL picks from week 14, and we were 2-1 across the board, 2-1 straight up, 2-1 against the spread, and 2-1 on the over-unders. Being 2-1 on the over-unders for me with how my totals have gone this season, magnifique. So straight up, 38-15, an excellent straight up season. Against the spread, 33-19-1. I feel really good about my against the spread work this season. Over under, we're still pushing towards 500. We're at 25 and 28. But we're 72% straight up, 62% against the spread. Both of those numbers are where I want them to be. Overall, 96, 62, and 1 single push for 60.38%, which is also overall where I want to be by the end of the season at that 60% mark. So feeling great all around. Standings are completely unchanged except for the fact that things are bunching up in the West Division yet again. You got Winnipeg at 9-3. They're on top of the bracket. But Calgary and Saskatchewan now both 8-4. So only one game behind. A loss by Winnipeg and a win by either one of those teams. And all of a sudden, we're talking legitimately about who might win this division. And those are 3 excellent football teams that all have a great chance. In the East, again, Hamilton and Montreal, that weird, one more loss by Montreal and one more win for Hamilton. Feels like that could be one of those situations where the division is then spoken for. I don't think Montreal's got enough real estate to catch them unless they win out. In the official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League, had a pretty darn good week last week stacking BC Lions. I still only sit in 33rd place out of 70, but brought in 104.9 points in week 14. That was my first 100-point week since I think either week 7 or week 8. I think it might have been week 8, but I came close a couple of weeks ago, but it's just so nice to get over that triple digits again. It feels good. 1,116.6 points overall in CFL Fantasy. My week 14 MVP was an easy one. Mike Riley throws for 286 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns. Were it not for the 2 interceptions that he threw up to Ottawa's secondary, it would have been a perfect game, basically. Brought in 30.5 fantasy points. My week 15 lineup in CFL Fantasy, and it is not deja vu, do not pinch yourself, it is going to look a little familiar, is now right in front of your eyes, and we're running it back. We're stacking BC Lions yet again. They scored the most points last week. Ottawa's defense is just as bad as I thought it was, if not worse. So why not go Riley, Burnham, Durant yet again in the receiving core? My real question marks come at running back because I've got Kadeem Carey as well as Rutley in there at running back, but both of those cases could see the former incumbent in that backfield see work this week or even get the start. For Kadeem Carey, we're talking about Don Jackson, and for Rutley, we're talking about John White. So I reserve the right to change my fantasy lineup this week, and if I do, it'll be just like a couple of weeks ago. I will point that out on Twitter. Also rocking Quan Bray, who has been a steady presence in the Owls receiving core, and with Vernon Adams playing as well as he is, why not grab an Owls receiver? Once again, we are going with the no defense route, but again, I do reserve the right to change my mind on that. In week 15, your slate of real-world CFL games look like this. The Calgary Stampeders are traveling to Toronto to be welcomed in by the Argonauts. Hamilton is in Edmonton taking on the Eskimos. Real interesting quarterback situation there in Edmonton. Winnipeg is in Montreal to take on the Owls. And a rematch from last week closes the week. The BC Lions in Ottawa to take on the REDBLACKS. Ottawa looking for some retribution. Let's start in Toronto with that Stampeders-Argonauts matchup. And for Calgary, 3 straight wins. They're up to 8-4 from being, they were 5-4 before they started this little win streak. All is fairly well in the last 4 games. They're 3-1, outscoring opponents by a touchdown, coming off of a 1-point victory last week against the Hamilton Tiger Cats, 19-18. And that was a matter of a special teams play had to be made, and it was Trent Roberson who made that play, coming around the edge and blocking Aliram Hiralahu. Yeah, I pronounced that right. I always trip up on that name. Blocking a field goal in order to preserve the win for Calgary. And despite a pretty good performance from Bo Levi Mitchell, it was really the defense and the special teams that stole that game for Calgary. I mean, Bo did throw for 342 yards, threw for a touchdown, only threw 60%, but still put up 342 on 60% and got the score that mattered. A touchdown pass to Eric Rogers with less than 7 minutes left in the game. That put Calgary ahead, and they put it in the hands of that defense and the special teams. And it was a defensive gem in that football game. 3 turnovers generated, only 1 penalty on defense for 15 yards. It's brutal when your defense takes penalties. It really, really is. It can really set you back. You think you're coming off the field, you take a penalty, all of a sudden you're staying on for a couple more plays. It's just demoralizing. So the fact that they only took 1 penalty for 15 yards, they put themselves in a good position to win. And only allowing a single point in the second half of that football game. They clamped down, realized that that's what needed to happen if they were going to have any chance of winning the game. Wouldn't you know who won the pony? They did. A team that actually had a pretty similar defensive performance in their last outing was the Toronto Argos, although competition certainly comes into play here. The Argos, coming off of a win back in week 13, they curb stomped the Ottawa REDBLACKS 46-17 back in week 13. That was Toronto's first road win in my lifetime. First road win since November of 2017, and it was a dominant performance. Let's not sugarcoat it at all. The Argos go on a 28-4 run in the second half, which completely flips the script on their previous 2 games before that, where they were allergic to holding on to a halftime lead. They get the halftime lead, but could not hold it to save their soul. So the fact that they went on that big run in the second half, a totally different team. Also, don't look now, but James Wilder kind of has his groove back a little bit. In his last 2 games, James Wilder has touched the ball 23 times and has turned it into 140 all-purpose yards in those touches. He also had 3 all-purpose touchdowns, 2 of them coming in the receiving game in that game in Week 13 against Ottawa. I actually feel happy for Toronto. I actually feel good that they won what was only their second win of the season. Isn't that the second time they won heading into their bye week? Curb stomping the worst team in the league, and yes, I will say that, the REDBLACKS are the worst team in the league. Curb stomping the worst team in the league does not mean that Toronto is ready to step to the Stampeders. I think Calgary will do just that. I think Calgary is going to stampede over the Toronto Argos in Week 15, so we are on the Calgary Stampeders on the road in Toronto to put up a win on the Argos. On the line, the Argos are 6.5-point dogs at home, and I had to think long and hard about this line because it's not very often that you get the Calgary Stampeders as favorites of under a touchdown. It's only happened 4 times this year. Granted, they're 1-3 against the spread in those games. But I am still going to take Calgary minus 6.5 because I know the team that the Stampeders are and the team that the Argos are. And I think if those 2 teams do actually clash, that Calgary's as good as they can be and Toronto's as good as they can be, Calgary wins this game 101 times out of 100. So, I think that Calgary team is going to show up because it's too late in the season to not show up if you really have aspirations of winning this thing. So we're going to take Calgary minus 6.5, despite the fact Calgary's also 0-6 against the spread against the East. That's a little tidbit for you. Calgary has not covered a number against the East Division against the spread this year. It's a little scary. Total in the game set at 53.5 points. I have this thing capped at a mid-50, 55, 56, getting up there somewhere. I think Calgary has themselves a field day on the offensive side, so I think we're going to have to go over on this one. Let's go over 53.5 points in Calgary, Toronto. Let's go to Edmonton now, where the Eskies are going to welcome Hamilton into town. Ticats 9-3, despite losing that 1-point game that we just talked about against Calgary in Calgary last week. The Ticats were in position to win that game all game long, and they simply, for lack of a better term, they got. Like, they got by one player making a play, and that's how close that football game was. The margin for error was nothing. But it's worth pointing out, it was kind of a tale of two games for the Ticats, at least on the offensive side. The first half of that game, they put up 17 points and 309 total yards. They looked like they were on their way to cruising in this game. And then in the second half, their offense completely sputtered and disappeared. Here is the Ticats' second half. 2 lost fumbles, a missed field goal, a punt, and the blocked field goal that ended the game. That was their second half. With the exception of picking up a single point on the kickoff. The Ticats did win in terms of total yardage on the ground and through the air, so they did win in those phases against a really good football team in Calgary. But what I do question is I do kind of question this running back by committee approach, and I realize Hamilton's backfield has been plagued by injuries. But Sean Thomas Erlington is still this team's leading rusher. He hasn't played since week 4. So even all the changes that they've been making and all the different guys they've been going with, nobody has established themselves. So they haven't taken the time to say, like, okay, Coombs, it's you, or Marshall, it's you, or whoever. Like, they haven't committed to a single back, and I think that's something that they're gonna have to do because this committee is not really working, and who knows if we're gonna see Sean Thomas Erlington again this season. It's worth pointing out the Ticats did just sign Tyrell Sutton onto their practice squad, so you could see him in game action in a couple of weeks. The Eskimos are losers of 3 straight games and have been outscored in their last 4 by a score of 30-24. So the defense has kind of not been doing the job it had been doing in the early season either. They're coming off of a 33-17 loss against Calgary. That was back in week 13. Remember, only 3 games last week. So we got 3 teams coming in off of a bye. Trevor Harris also getting knocked out early in that game. And that obviously is the single biggest storyline for the Eskies in this game. He's got an arm injury, and the Stampeders just kind of rolled from there. Logan Kilgore stepped in at quarterback for the Eskimos, and he didn't play well enough to put them in a position to win against a team like Calgary. He didn't have to go out there and throw, 290 yards and 3 touchdowns. He just had to do enough to put them in a position to win, and neither through his completion percentage nor his actual yardage gained, he didn't do that, and I don't necessarily know that he would do that this week. Obviously, the Trevor Harris thing is the single biggest thing to watch in this game, whether he plays or not. I think he is seeing a doctor today, I think it might be, today being Wednesday, to kind of get their opinion on, playing versus not playing. He hasn't practiced. He didn't practice yesterday. I don't think he's going to practice today. So, it certainly seems like he's not going to play. So with Trevor Harris not in, or at less than 100% rest of season, let's make an assumption, all right? We're running on the hypothesis that he's going to be less than 100% the rest of the season. And with the defense not playing the way that it had been playing in the early season, is this Edmonton Eskimos team better than a crossover? This is back-to-back road games for the Ticats, although they did lose last week, so that becomes a bigger deal if a team won on the road last week and then they're playing a second game. But they played well in that one, and Logan Kilgore is, to me, a gigantic question mark. I got to see what he's going to do over the span of 4 quarters in a game that he knows he's starting. So I think I got to skew on the safe side here and take the Hamilton Ticats on the road in Edmonton. Let's take Hamilton to beat the Eskimos. On the line, Edmonton is 2.5-point dog at home, so Hamilton's a 2.5-point favorite. You only have to lay 2.5 points against Logan Kilgore. I feel pretty good about that. It's a small price to pay. Plus, the Ticats 7-3-2 against the spread thus far on the season. The Eskimos are only 4-8, and that's spending most of the season with Trevor Harris. They've only covered against the spread 4 times in 12 games. So I like Hamilton here. We're going to hammer the Ticats minus 2.5. Total in the game set at 51.5 points. If Trevor Harris was in there, I may have considered looking at the over here. Right now, I've only got this thing capped at like a mid to high 40, and the two teams have only combined to hit 9 overs in 24 games. So we're going to skew on the under here, go under 51.5 points in Hamilton, Edmonton. And before we move on to our final 2 games of the week, we're going to take the opportunity, as we always do, to plug our wonderful friends and sponsors at Nerd Tees. Ladies and gentlemen, nerdtees.ca. Use that promo code BWFinest. That's going to save you 15% at checkout. You're going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $75, and there's just so much good stuff. Why wouldn't you spend that much money? If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, everything is in US dollars for you. You get an excellent conversion rate on the US dollar. Today's blend is delicious, delicious root beer. Reminds me of my days overeating at A&W. It smells great. It tastes great. It's root beer in a hot tea. Nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Save your money. Get your free shipping. Find yourself something to love and find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Let's go to Montreal now for what I think could probably be the game of the week. And this is like back-to-back playoff type games, I would say, for Montreal. We got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in Montreal taking on the Alouettes. Blue Bombers got back on the happy side of par last time out. They're 9-3 on the season. Winnipeg in the Banjo Bowl, avenging their previous week's loss to Saskatchewan by absolutely running them out of the building 35-10. Obviously, you score 35 points, you only give up 10. That was an excellent bounce-back performance on both sides of the football for a Blue Bombers team that has Grey Cup aspirations, and that's what they needed to do in that game. They got the job done. And that game was basically a fait accompli by halftime. They scored 21 points, did the Blue Bombers, in the second quarter, which propped them to a 25-point lead at halftime, and they had touchdowns on the ground, touchdowns through the air, even had a touchdown on special teams. And the guy I truly have to shout out is Chris Streveler. 4 total touchdowns in that game, and that does this. That shuts me up, because I had criticized him for the couple of previous weeks leading into that game for being like, man, he's got to do more through the air, and can this team win with Chris Streveler, and blah, blah, blah. 4 total touchdowns, he absolutely made me eat some crow. The Alouettes dropped a 2-point decision in Saskatchewan last week. That drops them to 6-5 on the season. But over their last 4 games, they've won 3 of them. They're outscoring opponents by a few points. The offense has been able to stay ahead of the defense, and that's kind of a theme. But in the game against Saskatchewan, the Owls just kind of let it slip away. Like they were in a position that they should have won that game, but they coughed up 17 points in the fourth quarter. And again, this felt like a playoff game, so it's possible that maybe the moment got a little too big for them. But let's start here with the good. Let's start with the great, in fact. And the great is Vernon Adams. Here's Vernon Adams' last 4 games. Get ready for this. And Alouettes fans, just bask in the glow. 93 of 128. That's 72.7% passing. Okay. 1,318 yards. That's an average of 330 yards a game. Okay. 6 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. You'd like to see the interception numbers come down a little bit, but he's kind of mitigated that with 23 carries for 70 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Alouettes fans, it's over. You found your guy. You found the heir apparent to Anthony Calvillo. Finally. It's been a long road between the Antonio Pipkins and the Drew Willies and the Johnny Manziels of it all. You finally got your guy, and your guy is Vernon Adams. And again, in the context of this game, all of the Alouettes' important skill players, so like Stanback, Lewis, Devier Posey, Quan Bray, they were all solid. They all had good performances in this game on the offensive side. The defense has some growing pains. Remember, this is like a newly not bad team. Like this was a bad team to start this season. So there's going to be growing pains here, certainly against higher competition and as it gets later in the season. It's okay to lose as long as you look good, as long as you put in a solid performance, as long as you were in position to win the game. These are lessons. These are growing pains. Montreal has a little bit of flexibility in order to do that because Ottawa's not catching them anytime soon. And having to play Saskatchewan and then Winnipeg back-to-back, that's trial by fire for the Alouettes. Should be another playoff-type game, should be a playoff-like atmosphere in Montreal. Winnipeg is just the better football team today. And I didn't even mention you-know-who is back in the backfield, Andrew Harris for Winnipeg. Third straight road team, but I mean, I got to take Winnipeg here. Winnipeg's the better football team right now. I think Montreal has the upside, the ceiling to be a better football team eventually, but today it's the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and that's who I'm going to take in this game. Let's take Winnipeg in Montreal to beat the Alouettes. On the line, Owls are 2.5-point dogs, the same as the Eskimos were, and once again, I like Winnipeg to win. It's a small price to pay. It's less than a field goal. I'm going to have to take that. The Bombers are 9-3 against the spread this season, so not a lot of money to be made betting against Winnipeg in general. So we're going to grab Winnipeg minus 2.5 against the spread. Total in the game set at 47 points. I've got this thing capped at a low 50, 51, 52. It's more than a field goal difference. I like this game to go over. Let's go over 47 points in Winnipeg, Montreal. And the last game we're going to look at this week sees the BC Lions travel to Ottawa, a rematch from last week, Lions REDBLACKS. So BC, like I mentioned before, picked up the win in that game last week, 29-5 over Ottawa. That game was in BC. And for the Lions, persistence paying off. A big home win against what was clearly the worst team in the CFL. But like we said, BC's been building towards this. They had back-to-back games where they looked good. They did the right things and didn't get rewarded for them. They got rewarded for those things in this game. And on the Ottawa side, at least this loss was still less embarrassing than the loss against Toronto. While it was sad to think that game last week was over about 3 minutes into the first quarter when BC goes up 6-0, because Ottawa only scored 5 points. The game was over at that point. Kind of sad to think about that if you're a REDBLACKS fan, and there's been plenty of sad things to think about if you're a REDBLACKS fan. But on the positive side of things, hey, Mike Riley accounting for all 4 offensive touchdowns for the BC Lions in that game, 2 through the air, 2 on the ground, and again, would have been an excellent game had Riley not thrown those 2 interceptions. The BC Lions did exactly what I told them flat out, I think in the episode last week, or maybe the week before, that they did exactly what I told them they needed to do. They needed to dominate time of possession. They didn't dominate, but they did win time of possession. And they needed to dominate on the ground, and they basically did that in this game. 24 carries for $142 and 2 scores as a team. They controlled the game on the ground, controlled the clock on the ground, and wouldn't you know who won the pony? Second time I used that in this episode. It led them to a win. On the REDBLACKS sideline, look, this defense is bad. They've given up 34 points a game in their last 4. The defense has completely caved in. They've lost 5 straight games. And the quarterback situation is fatal here. When you have to choose between Jonathon Jennings, Dominique Davis, and Will Arndt, here's the problem. So far on the season, Jonathon Jennings has been the best passer. He's been the most efficient passer, the longest yards per attempt. Dominique Davis runs the football better, a better average carry, more yards, and 3 or 4, maybe even 5 rushing touchdowns. But Will Arndt also deserves a chance to start a game because the 2 quarterbacks in front of him have been ineffective, have not won, have not played well. I would give him probably this game, maybe even the next game. I want to see if I've got anything in him. If I don't, then I know I can cut bait and move forward with Dominique Davis and Jonathon Jennings, and I'll have to decide from there. But I would give Will Arndt a start or 2 and see what I've got in him. Look, the bread and butter of this is you can't convince me after last week's 5-point offensive gem. You can't convince me that Ottawa's worth picking right now. Show me. Prove me wrong. Prove me wrong by winning a football game before I even think about picking you straight up. I'm willing to get the next REDBLACKS game wrong by picking against them because that's what they've earned over the last 5 games. I don't say that very often, but I'm willing to get the pick wrong because the team has not earned my pick. So obviously we're on the Lions here. We're going to take BC in Ottawa. We're taking all the road favorites this week. So this will be an interesting experiment. Let's see how this goes. BC in Ottawa beats the Red Blacks. Against the spread, BC's only a 3-point favorite. It's a relatively small price to pay. The Red Blacks have only covered one spread at home this year in 6 games, versus BC has covered 3 of 5 against the East Division. So we're going to take the Lions -3. Yes, I'm on all the favorites. Yes, I like all the favorites to cover. Shoot me. Total in the game set at 47.5 points. These two teams just combined for 34 last week. I've only got this capped at a mid-40, trying to factor in Ottawa being angry at only scoring 5 points. The two teams are combined 4-9 on the over-unders in games outside of their own division. So when Ottawa plays the West and when BC plays the East, they've only hit 4 overs in 13 games combined. You got to skew on the under. We're going to go under 47.5 points in BC Ottawa. There you go, folks. Those are your picks for Week 15 in the CFL in 2019. We'll go over the picks here with you one more time. We're taking all 4 road teams to win straight up. We've got Calgary winning in Toronto. We've got Hamilton winning in Edmonton. We've got Winnipeg winning in Montreal. And we've got BC winning in Ottawa. We're also taking all 4 of those teams against the spread. They're all favorites. Calgary -6.5, Hamilton and Winnipeg -2.5 points each, and the BC Lions -3. We're going over 53.5 points in Calgary, Toronto. We're going under 51.5 points in Hamilton, Edmonton. We're going over 47 in Winnipeg, Montreal, and we're going under 47.5 in BC and Ottawa. Just like that, Week 15's in the books. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the games this week. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees. If you've been watching the NFL show, I hope you've been enjoying it. If you're continuing your patronage to the CFL show, I appreciate that maybe even more, because this is kind of the little engine that could, especially once the NFL starts. Thank you so much. Enjoy the games. We'll see you again in Week 16.